I'd like to welcome Kathee, Scoggin, and Bube for our part 2.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you all again. And Sue-Ann will start in just a few minutes. I'm going to go ahead and just get us going. First of all, thanks, Katie, for remembering to make sure people got the handouts and have those available. Students who have a combined vision and hearing loss. The reality of it is when there is a combined vision and hearing loss, whether it is mild or significant, what it does is it takes information out and requires that the person try to plug in what they think that missing information is. And any of us who have tried that when we've been in a very noisy room and we couldn't quite pick up some of the words and we've put words in, we all can get a good laugh out of some of the things we thought people said or did. And so I think that's one of the things I want to remind people about, that sometimes they think that a mild hearing loss or a mild vision loss is not that important. Well, when you think about education and the fact that we depend so heavily when we're teaching on vision and hearing, you can imagine how many adaptations need to be made for students in order for them to be on an equal playing field with the rest of the students in the gen ed classes. I also want to make a comment about communication. Communication among those of us on a team is crucial. Communication with families is crucial. Well, communication is the key for all of the students that you're working with and that I work with and Sue-Ann works with and Katie works with. The reality is that without that communication, the opportunity to have an effective transition plan and to have the most, to have potential met as an adult is very dependent upon communication. So keep that in mind as we're going through everything this week about what if that student doesn't have the communication that we anticipate? And typically we anticipate people would be able to sign, or people would be able to talk, or at least they'd be able to write to us. Some of the students we're talking about don't have any of those three options. And so I want you to think about in terms of communication for those people too. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started, and this is just a reminder that we are so grateful to the staff people, to the families, and to the children with deafblindness who allow us to use videos because they are so powerful. So we're here to continue to catch the vision. The outcomes for today is the continuing idea of catching a vision for the future. And someone last week, and I want to think it was maybe Melva, made the comment about the idea that, gosh, using videotape really gives you an option in different environments to really find out way more about the student than we do by just sitting and having a meeting. Then we're going to talk about transition services and then coordinating with adult agencies. We're going to do just a quick review of the post-secondary goals today. Then we're going to get on to the transition services, a course of study, the annual IEP goals, and adult agencies. And you all remember this from last week, and I'm sure all of you remember it from lots of transitions that you may have been doing with students. So just a reminder about last week, we talked about assessments. We talked about the needs, the strengths, the preferences, and the interests of the student, and some ways that we can find those things out. And I want to point back to the idea of looking in different environments and talking to different people for those students who may not be able to share with us verbally all the different interests they have, what they consider their own strengths or preferences and needs. And then we talked about, so we talked about the needs being barriers in some cases. You know, what do we need to overcome? And then the interests, we pointed out last week that interests and preferences are similar, but preferences are often like, well, I prefer chocolate ice cream, but if you only have strawberry, I'll have strawberry, versus an interest, which really is more of a passion. And for some of us, they tend to be obsessions at times, too. Okay, Sue Ann, you want to take over?
Sure. Thank you for that summary, Kathee. So the assessments are essential because you can't build a transition for a student without knowing where you're going. And you need to start with those assessments. And then you need to define where you're going, and that's where the measurable post-secondary goals are. And legally, there has to be 2 goals, the third one if appropriate. So we need an education and training goal for every student. We need an employment goal for every student, and then an independent living goal as appropriate, and that appropriateness is defined by the IEP team. So just to summarize from last week, a post-secondary goal should reflect high but realistic expectations, forward movement instead of a dead-end approach. It can incorporate internal or external supports. So if a student needs support or one-on-one, it can incorporate that. And it may initially be less specific. And then as the student gets closer to graduation or leaving high school, then it can be more specific. So for instance, we might say upon graduation, student will be employed in the food service industry. We don't know where, if that's going to be bussing tables, greeting people as they walk in the door. We don't know if that's the chefs, but just the industry. And then as the student reaches, as we get more information and we've done job shadowing and we've experimented and we've got more details about the student and what their likes and dislikes are and their needs and their strengths, then we can start to say student will run a coffee business with supports. All right, so we can be more specific in that food service as the student gets older. Or we can change it totally altogether and realize the student has no business or the student absolutely doesn't want to work with food or the food service industry, and we can completely change the destination. So it can go slightly or drastically, and that's okay. That's just kind of like our job. Sometimes we set out on one path and then we decide, you know what, that is not for me, and we go a totally different direction. But a lot of skills that we learn going one path can be applied to the next path. Just a reminder of the formula for a post-secondary goal, because it is so different than an annual goal, that after high school, student will, and then what are they going to do? So in order for a post-school goal to be measurable, it must be measurable. They're not required to have a baseline or a target like an annual goal. So we're not going to say 5 out of 10 times. So some examples. After graduation, Miranda will participate in a center-based program designed to teach daily living skills along with community and social integration. So again, after graduation, something she will do, and where and how she's going to do it. So I'd like you to think about Miranda. And as we think about Miranda from last week, do we remember? Let me do yes or no. Was everyone that's here today on the chat, on the webinar for last week? You can check yes or no. So most people. So I'm going to turn it back to Kathee real quick and have her just give us a little update in remembrance of Miranda before we move on.
Okay, so last week we were talking about, we were using Miranda as one of the examples. And what we want to do is we want to kind of go back and just kind of finish up the summary of this time. So thinking about Miranda, I'd like you to type in the chat window thinking about the post-secondary goal, if you have any questions regarding what we talked about last week as far as the post-secondary goal for her. Also, I would just like you to imagine, based on some information that we gave, think about the fact that is there something else that Miranda might do besides the issue of the coffee, working in a coffee business or doing grocery shopping and delivery. Those were two things we talked about. Did anybody get any other sense from last week? And I know that was a whole week ago, but are there any questions? Because we're going to ask you a question next, and we want to make sure people have got their questions asked. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do, is we're going to go to the next slide, and this is going to be an ABCD answer, and Michaela's going to set it up so that you can answer this way. So which of the following post-secondary goals are accurately written for Miranda? Miranda will run her own business with supports. Miranda wants to run her own business. Miranda will run her own business in the food service industry after completing high school, or none of the above. So if you look right above, it says A, B, C. Some of you are now putting yours in. Good. Okay, so far it looks like C's the winner, so I'm going to turn this back to Sue Ann and let her talk about that.
Well, that's wonderful. So C is the winner. Miranda will run her own business in the food service industry after completing high school. So 1, it says high expectations. 2, it talks about after high school and what she will do. So the problem with B is this word wants. Miranda wants to run her own business. I want to win $1 million. That's not a high and necessarily attainable goal. The idea that I want it is wonderful, and I already want it, so I've met my goal. So, but it's not something she's going to do after high school. So, and Miranda will run her own business with supports. A, it needs to specifically say after high school, upon completing high school, upon leaving high school. And that's a necessary component because it is post-secondary after high school. All right, Kathee, I think we're ready to meet some students.
Okay. Okay, so this week we're going to introduce you, we're going to add to the group, to Miranda, we're going to add Audrey. And Audrey is 26 years old. She has Usher syndrome, which was diagnosed in the middle of her senior year in high school. And just brief information, you can Google this and get a lot more information. But Usher syndrome is a situation where a student starts out either with a hearing loss, such as hard of hearing, or profoundly deaf. And then gradually, due to retinitis pigmentosa, starts to lose their peripheral vision. So think about the peripheral vision coming in to only having very narrow central vision. And for those of you who are vision teachers, of course, the idea that having the central vision is where you can continue to read, but when you start losing even more of that. But imagine about peripheral vision. What starts to affect you if you're starting to lose peripheral vision, the stuff that's on the outside? Think about what that would force you to have to do. And why don't you just jot that in the chat box. If you're familiar with Usher, drop it in. If you're not familiar, just think about the idea that if you cannot see anything but this very center, what would it require from you? What kinds of things would be a challenge for you? I see some people writing. Learn to be more aware of your surroundings visually. You'd have to start to look around because you're not going to be able to catch it out of the corner of your eye. What do you think that would do to your driving? Stairs can be scary. Peripheral, hard to be aware of people coming from the side or even from the back. Anything else? I see a couple more people writing. Any situation that is wide and open. That's right. So if you actually take your finger, your hands, and do something like this, and don't allow yourself to look out peripherally, start to think and press in against your eyes, you can start to see what kinds of things it requires you to do. I'm going to have to start moving my head back and forth. Can you imagine how fatiguing that may become? So she also, Audrey, communicates through speech, sign, and written language. Usually for a child who has what they call Usher Syndrome 1, who's profoundly deaf, you get diagnosed earlier in life with that. Think about the fact that at dusk or evening, then there are problems because of the rods and cones. And like I said, you can look this up. She's now working as a medical office assistant in a small community. She lives in a home that she bought almost 7 years ago. What does she do for fun? Well, she's currently developing a wish list of things she wants to do before all of her vision goes. She likes to dance with friends, she likes to scrapbook, and she plays with her nephew when he's in town, and now you can see her with her little nephew. He's so cute. So this is Audrey. So we're going to be talking about Audrey too, because some of those people and students you're working with may have academic skills that look more similar to Audrey than to Miranda. So I want us to keep in mind that this is a huge gamut of students with combined vision and hearing loss. Okay? We're going to, yeah, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Kathee. As we look at the flow chart, we've already talked about assessments and then writing the goals, so where are we going when we graduate? And now the transition services are what do we need to get us there? So let's look at that. So transition services can be in the areas of specially designed instruction, can be related services, community experiences, and employment, adult living, and daily living. So what are transition services? They are a set of coordinated activities designed to be results-oriented process that facilitates successful movement from school to post-secondary. So let's say a student, for example, doesn't dress appropriately for the food service industry. Then a transition service might be specially designed instruction on how to dress appropriately, which may not have been an annual goal in the past, but now can be added to the IEP because it is a service that the student needs to get them to post-school employment or education and training, and independent living if necessary. So, let me say that again. Before a student turns 16, all their services are based on the psychological evaluation and their present levels of performance, and then there's annual goals written that align with that. Once a student turns 16, or before if appropriate, the student can have services that will get them to their post-school goal that may not have been on their IEP before, such as specific specially designed instruction in independent living skills, behavior, or some of the soft skills that you need for a job, such as dress, attitude, and so forth. These activities, The transition services are based on a student's needs, their strengths, their preferences, and their interests, so it goes back to the assessments. And they include, again, instruction, related services like OT, PT, speech, community experiences such as riding the bus, and the development of employment and other post-school living objectives when appropriate, the daily living skills. So again, these four things, instruction, related services, community experience, and the employment, adult living, and daily living should focus on academic and functional achievement, again, to facilitate the movement from school to post-school life. So as you think about those things, there's some questions you can ask yourself as you are planning this part of the IEP. So what experiences must the student participate in this academic year that are necessary for achieving the identified post-secondary goals? And what services and specific instruction are essential this year for the student to develop skills and knowledge to attain their post-secondary goals? So on an IEP, you're going to see something like a post-secondary goal, such as after grad, and this is, again, an example. We don't know David. I just wanted to show you an example. After graduation, David will receive on-the-job training from the vocational rehabilitation staff at the Occupational Training Center. So this is where he's going to receive his training. Instead of college, a 4-year college or 2-year college, he's going to get on-the-job training and education from this particular staff. So what do we need to do this year? So the IEP team then says, well, he might need some community-based vocational training, and the training center staff are going to provide that. And there might be instruction on the use of augmented communication device, and the special ed teacher or speech therapist are both going to provide that. And this might be important because he might need new pictures, he might need new boards created for his post-school environment, but we need to go ahead and introduce these now, so that's why it's here. I'm not sure what he wants to do there, so we're going to do a picture career interest inventory, and we're going to do an AT eval to determine if this really is the appropriate device for his post-school needs. And so those are some examples of what a transition services might look like. They're not written as goals, they're just a list of things that we need to do and who's responsible for those things. So I'd like us to, we're going to go back to Kathee, I think, and look at, do we have a video on Miranda?
Actually, we're going to go ahead and do a video on Audrey first. So I want you to be thinking about Miranda and Audrey both. But we're going to see Audrey first and think about just what Sue Ann has been talking about in the area of instruction, related services, community experiences, and then employment. And then what I'd like you also to do is think about the issue of communication here, and think about, this is an interview with Audrey. And I'd like you to just think about this in relationship to those areas, to the post-secondary goal. She's now looking, this is when she was out of school, and so she was looking back. And I just recently had an email from her where she was looking even further back. So with that, I'm going to have us play this video, and remember to go down to the triangle, the white triangle in the bottom left-hand side of the video, and we're going to press play now.
Why lighting matters.
Is that an accommodation that's helpful at any time?
Sometimes in bright areas I have to have, it depends on the lighting, like bright fluorescent light. It's too bright, it hurts my eyes, so hat would help. Otherwise, half the time I need more light to be able to see. If lighting is not very good, some classrooms are not well lit, some buildings are just not well lit, so it just depends on the lighting.
And then if there's not enough lighting, what do you do?
Well, some places are very accommodating. Like my last job was very dark, and I had stated multiple times that I could not see, it was too dark. I was running into patients, but they would not accommodate for me. I would put a lamp on my desk, and that would just make my work area brighter, but I literally had to either avoid going through the lobby and go a different way, or slowly make my way by feeling around the desk, making sure I wasn't running into patients. My coworkers were trying to help me. They would be like, watch out, there's a chair, or watch out, there's a patient coming, there's a patient there with a leg out or something. So that was very difficult. The lighting situation was a big mess.
In your current workplace, is it more accommodating?
So far I haven't really needed any accommodation. The building is brighter, they have more windows, so it's more natural light, and so it's very bright. So I haven't had any issues with that so far, but I do have a feeling that if I did need accommodations, my boss is more understanding and would help me.
Light and glare affect a person with RP in a lot of different ways.
So in that way, once again, I mentioned earlier about the issue of communication, and that Audrey can sit there and communicate about what her needs are. But had we, as we were going through the transition plan, been thinking about those items, what are the things that she needs to advocate? What are maybe some areas or environments that are well lit enough that would be better for her? How does she advocate for herself? Those are all things that we want to think about in that transition plan, and Audrey's in a place where she can have that conversation at a certain level. But please remember, she only found out that she had a vision problem halfway through her senior year of high school. And so one of the questions that's going to come up later that Sue Ann's going to address is the issue of, okay, so she graduated at 18 like most seniors do, and could she have stayed on more years after finding that out and having an opportunity to possibly get that transition plan incorporated into an IEP that was more appropriate, that she wasn't just sitting in more classes per se at the high school. So we'll talk about that some more. So thinking of that, or what are some of the specially designed instruction that she may have needed? What are the related services that she may have needed? What are the community experiences? What are the employment and adult living and daily living things? And this is where I want to make a comment. It is one thing for a student to be born with vision loss and or hearing loss. It is another thing for the student to gradually lose that vision or lose that hearing because they knew what they had before and something is happening to them. And the question is, what's happening to me? So thinking about that, what might be a need for a student who is losing skills, whether it's vision, hearing, it may be neurological, so they may be losing other kinds of skills. What may be something that those students would need incorporated for them that might not be true for a student like Miranda, who was born with her vision loss and her hearing loss? Any thoughts, any ideas? Oh, I see some people writing. Think also in terms of the fact that what kind of a wish list is she making right now? Self-advocacy skills and an adult resource that she could get some connections to other resources from. That's a good one. Grief counseling. For students who are losing a skill, there is a process of grieving. If I am born blind, I don't know what I'm missing. And that's not to make a judgment about one being better than the other. They're just different. Orientation and mobility, low vision training. She's likely to be aware of all the rights. Is she likely, and probably not, to be aware of the rights she has as a person with special needs. Braille training and vision training. And if you go onto our website, the www.wsdsonline.org, you'll go into those video clips, and she talks about Braille. And I think you might find that very interesting, kind of fun to do. So with that, let's be thinking about, yes, she may need grief counseling. And it's taken her how many years now? She's been out of school since she was 18 and she's 26. So she's still dealing with the loss of the vision. And at the time you just saw her interview, she had more vision than she has now. So also be aware of that. Okay, now let's go to Miranda since we were talking about her. Now remember Miranda from last week. And here are some of the same questions, and we're going to show you a different video. Actually, I'm going to show you 2 video clips on her. What are some of the transition services that you think Miranda would need in the area of specially designed instruction, related services, community experiences, and then employment or adult living and daily living? So the first one is her working on the newsletter that she handles in her classroom. And the second one, I just wanted to show you an example of the kind of things that occur, and so you can see it very clearly of how she uses the iPad to communicate when she's delivering coffee. So let's go ahead down to the white triangle and press play now.
The week, expand your knowledge, recipe, fashion tip, and staff person of the week. What would you like to do first? Fashion tip. You are amazing. All right, awesome. So Miranda has chosen fashion tip as our first option. So Miranda, for fashion tip this week, would you like shoe tip, hair tip, or clothing tip? Which one would you like to do? Hair tip. Awesome. Okay, hair tip it is. So Miranda will now lead me over to the computer. Hold on, Miranda, I gotta unlock the door. And we will search for hair tips. Okay, Miranda, so we're gonna have the computer. And we will pull up different hair tips for summer and see what we find and which one you like.
And remember that that was not her motorized wheelchair. And so she was guiding with her hands. So the other person was not pulling her. She was actually guiding and pushing with her hands or moving them right and left. And then the next thing that's going to come up is a short one, and this is about her coffee orders. So push the white triangle now.
My coffee job. Coffee orders. Can you go get Jenny for me, please? Do you want coffee delivered on Thursday? Please find your drink. That will be $3.28.
And so one of the things to go back to is the issue about Miranda is what are some of the things that you're thinking about that need to be in there? And I wanted to make sure that you saw the kind of communication system that was set up for her so that she could communicate, and I wanted it close enough that you could see it, so that she, even though she could not go get somebody necessarily, she could direct someone else and ask them nicely, would you go get her? You know, what kind do you want? Please hit the one you want. So some of it is set up ahead of time because we know those 4 people and what kinds of things they typically order and set it up. But just as Sue Ann mentioned earlier on those 4 areas of transition services, it may need to look different because those 4 people aren't going to be there when she's out of high school. It's going to be 4 other people. So there's going to have to be somebody there to help make that happen. Okay? Go ahead, Sue Ann.
Thank you, Kathee. So we're going to think about Miranda. And I just picked one post-secondary goal. And I actually picked an independent living goal. But we can think about some of those other things that we just saw in the videos. So typically what you see on an IEP is the post-secondary goal, and then under it, a place to think about and to write down some of the transition services she might need. Now, note that you might brainstorm a lot of services, but you're going to have to decide which ones are appropriate this year that are foundational for her to move on to the next thing next year. Still thinking about the goal. So if I think about this goal as something that's going to happen in 5 years, just like a destination, let's say I'm going to drive from here to New York. Well, I'm not going to do it in 1 day. I might do it in 5 or 6 days. So in day 1, how far am I going to get, and what do I need to get there? So with post-secondary goals, we're going to think, what do we need to do the first year? So this is an independent living goal. After graduation, Miranda will make choices about what to wear and will participate to the maximum extent possible in dressing and grooming routines for home and work environments. So you can think about this one or think about what you saw in the video, and let's brainstorm and put in the chat box some ideas that you have for transition services for Miranda. Okay, great. I see a couple people typing. Yes, the post-secondary goal is, it might be because you're writing it when the student is 16 to begin with. So what do you need this year to help her move towards that goal? So what's something you want to teach this year in specially designed instruction? What's something that she might need as related service? So I see Kathee put an AT eval. Absolutely. The student is 16. Is this device that student has, is it going to grow with her? Is this program going to grow with her? Or is there something else that's more appropriate for post-school? And also, who owns the device? If the school owns the device, is the student going to be communicationless when they leave school? So that's something to think about. So I see matching clothing. I see OT services, speech therapy services, fine motor skills services. Yeah, let's think about the living situation. What do we want to think about? Budgeting. Absolutely. Lots of services that we can put in. Now, some of them we might decide we want to teach this year, and some we might decide we want to wait another year or two because there's something else that needs to come first. But we can think about those things as a team and decide and then put them in here. Now, the other key is we have to decide who's responsible for them. For instance, if I put personal management instruction, the special ed teacher, so that's who's responsible. Instruction on accessing the portable communication system, the special ed providers are going to take care of that. But if you have a student who maybe there's an OT, maybe there's a behavioral support that a student needs, maybe there's a soft skill. Let's say the student's late to school every day, and maybe the student's not in a wheelchair and they just sleep in every day, and they just have no sense of time. So maybe the teacher's going to work on time, but maybe the school counselor is going to check and connect with that student every day, and that's a transition service that's going to be provided so that we know the student is working towards attendance, because we know that's a specialized, that students need that skill for employment. Range of motion, I see that. Okay, so I think you guys have the idea. I just want to emphasize that it doesn't have to be, you're not limited to what was in the psych evaluation, that 3-year eval as a service. So anything that's needed, that's a barrier to help a student go from point A to the post-school goals is appropriate in this place. So again, I have another example here. After graduation, Miranda will be self-employed, continuing to expand Miranda's jittery jalopy delivery with supports. And it looks like a lot of the things that you've mentioned already in the chat box would be appropriate here. Budgeting, range of motion, the communication device. All right, so okay, I see. Is a big one. How do we justify this if it's not on the eval? So why does she need range of motion for this job? You have to answer that question. Why does she need range of motion? I see people typing. I'm waiting for a couple of responses. All right, to use our communication device. So that's all you have to say. It's all you need. Is in this spot we're going to put range of motion OT, range of motion to access communication device, service provided by OT. And if that's something she wasn't getting before, but you know, and the team decides that it's necessary to meet this post-secondary goal, then it can be provided. Okay, great questions. So we've already thought about Audrey, and I believe we brainstormed a few topics. Does anyone want to type in some things here? I'm just reviewing the chat. A low vision training. So this is a student who has a new service, or could have had a new service at 18 because she was losing her vision. And I noticed one of the first things that was mentioned was self-advocacy skills. So there's a resource I want to point you to for self-advocacy, and that's something called Disability 411. Beth, if you're listening, would you type in the chat box where they can find Disability 411 information? But this is something that can be added as a transition service to help the student know how to advocate for themselves and how to do that appropriately, as well as what the laws are. And it also helps the student understand when they want to disclose and when they may not want to disclose their disability. So that's something that we absolutely could teach as a transition service for a student. Okay, so Beth was saying it's on the NCWD Youth website, and she's going to put a link in the chat box for us in just a minute. Okay. So the next piece in the transition flow chart is writing the course of study. So the course of study, it can be a paragraph or a list, but it is a current description of the coursework and the activities to achieve the goal that's going to happen this year. So let's pretend that the post-school goal is like a vacation that I've saved up for 5 years. I'm saving up for this vacation. I want to go, and I have Abu Dhabi on here, and I'm using this because my best friend picked up within months and decided that's where she wanted to teach school. So if I wanted to save up for this big trip to Abu Dhabi, what I might do for the course of study, based on multiple interest inventories, Sue Ann, that's me, would like to move to Abu Dhabi. This year, she will enroll in appropriate language course and history classes. She will study math specifically to learn how to create a budget for the trip. So that's what I'm going to do this year. It's not everything I need to do to get ready for this big trip. It's what I'm going to do this year. And so we can think about a student who wants to go to Spain. Are they going to take German as their language course? No, Spanish. So a course of study is a simple paragraph or a short list that shows what's appropriate for this year. So I have a couple examples. Oh, and I will say, the transition course of study includes but is not limited to vocational education opportunities, participation in advanced placement classes, work-based learning experiences, etc. And it has to be specific to the student's post-secondary goals. So it has to align with the post-secondary goals. So when I have vaccines, thank you, yes, and that would be an outside agency. That would be a linkage I need to make. I might need a passport. I might need to have cultural lessons. Learn how to dress myself in is it a burqa? And get used to wearing the black outfit in 120-degree weather. All those kinds of things. So a course of study, it's just a summary of what's gonna happen this year. So I have a couple examples to help us out here. So this example is from a medically fragile student that has significant cognitive and physical disabilities and who also has a modified curriculum. So just a short picture of this student. So Jen will continue to receive specially designed instruction with an alternative curriculum, including instruction focused on self-care and communication skills, and will participate in work experience and vocational elective courses during her last 2 years. Now, a course of study can be multiple years, but it has to be in the IEP in a minimum of 1 year. So for this student, they wrote a 2-year course of study, and I can tell that she's in special classrooms. I can tell that she's getting a different curriculum designed for her, and that she needs self-care and communication, and that we're going to get some work experiences. So now the course of study could have said work experiences in the food service industry, but we have an example here. So our next example is another student with significant disabilities. And yes, Kathee, this is a very general description. Very, very broad, but it should help tell a story. So during this upcoming year, Andy will receive specially designed instruction with an alternative curriculum, including instruction focused on career development, functional academics, and community reference skills that are linked to the state standards. It can be more specific, but it's an overview of what we're going to do this year. So if I think about Audrey, I might say to myself, the course of study for her might include instruction on disability, awareness and self-advocacy skills, as well as whatever her academics happen to be for that year. But just kind of a broad paintbrush. Think broad paintbrush. And it should help tell the story. Absolutely right. Help tell the story. So a course of study can also be a list. In some IEPs, you'll see a list, but it should also tell a story. I can see that this student is getting life skills, math for living, adaptive PE, and career technical classes. So I can see that this student's getting specially designed instruction. It doesn't tell as good a story as the paragraph, but it tells me a story. What I should not see is Algebra 2. I shouldn't see Spanish class if the student's going to Germany. So it helps tell the story. So before I turn it back to Kathee, I want to say Kathee gave us a wonderful graphic that we tweaked just a little bit. And want to provide this for you because a lot of students, including a student with Usher syndrome that we met today, their vision of being in school is sitting in a classroom. And that doesn't have to be the case. So here the classroom should be blue, the school is red, and the community should be green. Something happened to our colors. But the point is that as a student with significant needs gets older, they shouldn't be in the classroom. They should be in the community. So if you think about our traditional students, students without disabilities, they go to school until they're 18, they graduate, school is what they've known, and then all of a sudden now they're no school, and usually they either go back to school for college or they get a full-time job. So there's a complete change. But for our students with significant needs, they need to make this change gradually. And so we need to provide them support with job shadowing, with community-based work as they're getting older. So when we see a student 18, 19, 20, they should not be in a school building sitting around all day getting instruction from a classroom teacher. They should already be out in the workplace. And so Kathee Scoggin developed this based on some materials that you see at the bottom there, but it shows the progression of when a student should be in the classroom or out of the classroom. Kathee, do you have anything to say about that?
You know, you and I had a conversation, Sue Ann, about the situation with Audrey, and so I followed up with an email to her and said, Audrey, if you think back about graduating at 18 and finding out about having Usher the last half of your senior year, if you could have seen a way not to be sitting in a high school classroom for the next couple years, but that you would have an opportunity to actually be out in the community in a job, a vocational placement, taking some kind of a preference test now that you knew about the vision loss, would you have taken advantage of that? And one of the things she said to me is she said, you know, looking back at it now, I would like to tell you, yes, I would have. She said, but I was 18, I was eager to get out of school, and no one had talked to me about the possibility that there could be other kinds of training. Now, what was exciting for her was that the year after she graduated, she went down to the School for the Blind and participated in what they call the LIFT program, L-I-F-T-T, and I'm going to guess a couple of you might know what that is. And so, you know, that's one of the pieces. And she said it was great because she was out in the community. They were teaching her orientation mobility. So she did get an opportunity for a year of that and working in the community down in Vancouver. And I'm sorry, I was supposed to write that down and I forgot to, you guys, but if you actually go onto the School for the Blind's website and put in LIFTT, it will explain the program and it'll tell you what the name is. It's a great name, but I spaced it. And just a reminder to you that the classroom is the green, the school is the red, and the community is the blue. So as you can see, as the older you get, the more community time there is. So, and I'm not sure what happened to that graphic, but I think that was a discussion you and I had about, is it possible to pose something that would look very different for students who may be 18, 19, 20, up to their 22nd birthday. And I know that there are some school districts that do it very differently. They actually have a transition program that looks different. So you may want to add onto that, Sue Ann, about what you were thinking.
No, I think you made some great points. Some schools do have transition programs, as you put it, but really this is individualized instruction, and the team for a particular student needs to think about what's appropriate. And the other thing that we might want to consider here is that a student, once they finish their graduation credits, they can't stay in for transition services. So the transition services and the graduation credits have to end at the same time. So let's say we did have a student who whose disability really showed up at age 18, or there were additional disabilities that came along. That program would need to be adjusted so that her services or his services would end at the same time that they finished all the transition services, such as teaching the soft skills, such as mobility, such as communication. So we need to make sure that maybe a student isn't taking a full 5 credit hours or something of school, that they're getting 1 or 2, but then they're out in the workplace the rest of the day, and that their special ed teacher is acting more like a career counselor or a case manager for the student, but the school still provides those supports for that student as the student is learning to transition out of the school environment. So, Kathee?
Okay, so one of the things that we want to do is we want to ask a question, and remember that last week we really focused on the assessment piece and the post-secondary goals. This week we just dealt with 2 additional areas of transition, and what I'd like you to do is go ahead and answer in the chat window what those 2 additional ones are, if you would. And I see some people typing, taking risks. I love it. And if you name one of them, that's good too. Okay, course of study is one. Good, thanks. And then the whole issue of the transition services, which was related services. What else? Does anybody remember what the other 3 were? Community experience, right? Employment, adult living, right? Good, good. So those are those areas, the transition services and then the course of study. And what I'd like you to do right now is I would like you just to think about the student who may have sent you to this training. And I'd like you to think about, would you take a chance, so you can list it, you don't have to write it in a pretty paragraph, but what would you call the course of study for the student you're thinking about for a year? Not for all 5 years, but like right now, what would you think it would be? Okay. And I see a couple people writing, so we'll wait and see what kinds of things come up. And again, keep thinking about the fact that we're talking about a huge continuum of students and their skills and their needs. So adult living and community experiences would be a part of that. Toileting, behavior, communication. Okay? Any others? So I see a few more. Community experience and communication. Communication, recreation, and leisure. What is that student going to do with their time when they're out of school? Job skill training and appropriate communication. This student is sometimes inappropriate with speaking to people. In-class jobs, in-school jobs. Math for life, cooking, home care, shopping, making appointments if applicable. So those are some of the things that you're looking at as a course of study. Those are great. Technology support, cooking, self-care, self-advocacy. So those, did you want to add anything to that, Sue? And if Sue Ann, and if not, you can go ahead and take the next part.
So with all of those ideas are wonderful. We might just write this year, during the current IEP year, student will, and then receive services in communication, specifically for employment, as well as community experience in the area of such and such. So I think those are all great. And then remember, it's just a couple sentences. It's really just a big, broad brush to help focus us. And so now the annual goals. This is something that's been a part of every IEP since the student was accepted into the as a student with special needs. And an annual goal are statements that describe what a student with a disability can reasonably be expected to accomplish within a 12-month period of the student's program. So for a goal to be measurable, an annual goal to be measurable, it has to have a time frame. So usually the 1 year by June 30th or whatever a year happens to be for that student. It has to have conditions, a behavior, what will they do, and criteria. So we'll talk about that. Annual goals, once a student turns 16, annual goals should align with the post-secondary goals. Now, not all of them may, but again, think about the IEP as telling a story. And if I'm going to France in 5 years, I shouldn't see an annual goal about student will pass Spanish or will do, so they need to align. So if I think about the food service industry, and I don't know what Miranda will be doing in the food service industry, but maybe in math class her goal is not learning to multiply. It might be using the calculator. Maybe it's identifying fractions in the measuring cups because she wants to be able to measure out the right amount of ingredients. And so the goal should somehow align to the post-secondary goal. Again, think of it as telling a story. So some questions to consider as you're thinking about the annual goals are: what skills and knowledge must a student attain this academic year that are necessary for achieving the identified post-secondary goals? So does Miranda need to know how to take money? Does she need to know how to count money? Or does she need to know how to run a credit card through her iPad device with the adaptive scanner? So what does she need in order to be successful in that post-secondary goal? And that's what her annual goal should be. So for a student who might be on a different track or taking maybe an algebra class, think about, I just lost my train of thought. I'll come back to that. And then the next question to think about are: what skills and knowledge does a student currently have that support their post-secondary goals? So what do they have already that support their goals, and what do they need? And then what are we going to teach them this year to help them get there? Again, an annual goal at this point can be something that was similar to what's been on the IEP in the past, but now once the student has reached 16, the goals align to the post-secondary goal. And if they need let me just take an example of what I heard earlier. If we have a student who occasionally says bad things in public, at school, with the school staff, we know if it's inappropriate or if it's sexual in nature, we know how to correct the student and we work with them on those skills because they're still learning. But in a post-school employment environment, if a student has an inappropriate outburst, they may be fired. And so we have to make sure that maybe the student wasn't getting training, and this wasn't a goal prior to age 16, but now, because the student needs this goal, and it's important that we have an annual goal to help a student decrease the outburst, then it can be added to the IEP. And that's what point I was going to make earlier, is it doesn't have to be a service or a goal that was identified through a formal evaluation. If it's something that is a barrier to employment, it is something that we should be working on and can be added to the IEP at this point. And again, it's age 16 or earlier if appropriate. And for the students in this population who have extreme needs, earlier might be very appropriate. So here's an example of an annual goal. Given a bus schedule with adapted pictures, Stephanie will select the correct time and stop for 5 scenarios of activities presented to her with 95% accuracy or better by December of the current year. So again, we know exactly what she's going to do. We know how we're going to measure it, so 95% or better, and we know when it has to be complete. So again, there's a difference between an annual goal and a post-secondary goal. This next slide takes us back to a post-secondary goal. So let's just remember the difference. A post-secondary goal is measurable, but it's something that happens after high school. It's something the student will do. So I'd like you to quickly give me A, B, C, or D. Which one of these may not be appropriate for Miranda? So remember Miranda. So I see that most people said C, complete graduation requirements, and that would be correct. That is not an appropriate post-secondary goal, and that is not an appropriate course of study either. Simply completing graduation requirements does not spell out what a student will do this year to meet their post-secondary goal. So now Kathee and I are going to lead you in the next two things. So I'm going to go ahead and let Kathee get on. But we want you to think about Miranda and Audrey or your own student and think about an annual goal. So again, an annual goal has a behavior. It has percentages or 3 out of 5, and it has a timeline. So Kathee, I'm going to let you take that as they start to type their ideas about annual goals in the text chat box.
Okay, and Sue Ann, while people are typing an idea that they may have for Miranda, Audrey, or their own student, just one of the things I would like to ask you is to look at a comment I made, and that is for Miranda, it is more of a communicating for her to another person to physically do what she cannot physically do herself. And something that I didn't share with people about Miranda is that her chances of actually lessening range of motion is pretty for sure as she's aging. And so for her, there's going to be a situation where something she could do earlier with range of motion she may not be able to do. So I think we need to think about what kinds of goals and objectives would I think about. What would be an example of an annual goal for her, because there's so many things she physically is not able to do. And I think that that's tricky for a lot of us who work with kids who physically are not in a position to do a lot of things. And it's how do we write a goal? So could you also address that while people are writing their ideas of an annual goal?
Absolutely, Kathee. So what I heard you say is that a student might lose function as they get older. or it might be harder for them. And so I'm not sure I would address that. It can be addressed in the annual goal, but I'd also address that in transition services and why it's important that we're adding services or that we are redoing an AT eval. Because we can't just provide something for a student as they are today, but we need to anticipate when they graduate, if we know that the condition is progressive in some manner, like loss of range of motion, then we need to anticipate that with our communication device and those needs post-secondary. So that could align with transition services. It could align with the assessment. It should be in the course of study. So again, it should tell a story, and I should see this thread. Think of it as a thread that goes through everything on the IEP. And if it's that important, I should see it everywhere. So if communication or range of motion or access to communication is the main barrier, then I should see it in every piece of the IEP so that it really tells a story that we're working on this piece in all aspects of what we do. Does that make sense, Kathee?
Yes, it does. And I think the other piece that I would just like to add to that is that may mean that for Miranda, many of her goals may end up being things that she's going to communicate within the context of what her post-secondary goal is by using a useful device and people needing to set up options for her. So I think that the annual goal that I'm thinking about for her would be probably maybe 3 or 4 that would show up being communicative in nature because of her not able to physically do many things. So does that also make sense to you? And I see that Melva gave one, and you want to respond to that one?
So I see Melva wrote job skill training and appropriate communication. So which job skill? So if it's, I'd be very specific. Student will use appropriate language from 1 out of 5 days a week to 5 out of 5 days a week. Something like that, as measured by a rubric or a checklist or however you're going to define that. But we have to be very specific if we're going to set a goal for it because it needs to be measurable. And so deciding what's appropriate language. So if we have a student who curses, then we would simply say student will not use curse words. And if you've counted that he uses 5 an hour, we'll decrease from 5 an hour to 1 an hour. That still might get him fired on some jobs, but that's what we're working towards this year. And then how you're measuring that through a rubric or through counting random different times throughout the day. Let's see here. Are there any other comments?
So there's another one here that talks about. Whoops. Let me go back up. Did you mention the one of by blank, comma, will successfully transfer items from one area to another, reducing the prompts needed from 9 out of 10 to 1 out of 5?
I think those look great. So by June, let's just say June 30th, student will successfully transfer items. Okay. Yes, they can make up nonsense words instead of using curse words. They could use fiddlesticks or SpongeBob SquarePants, something like that. I see here a self-advocacy goal. Audrey will tell others of what the lighting and current setting does for her vision with accommodations and what. So we could set a goal for self-advocacy. It could also just be a transition service without it being a goal. So we can say we're going to teach her the skill, but not decide to measure how she does with it. because here we're assuming that we know when it's appropriate for a student to disclose or not disclose. So we can work with a student, but I think I'd be careful because some students want to disclose and others don't. And we could be talking about disability. We could be talking about sexual orientation. If we put other things in there, then some red flags might come up about what a student, about judgment. And we want to be careful about that, that we're not, but I do think she needs to learn about advocacy, and maybe we could come up with another way for her that she will identify 4 ways that she could work with an employer to tell them about her disability, from not knowing how to tell them, from not knowing how to talk to an employer to knowing how to talk to an employer given 5 scenarios. But I don't think we want to measure whether she's actually telling people or not, because that's a very personal and private decision of when a student or an adult will disclose their disability. And what, in one situation, you might think they need to, they might say, you know what, I'm doing okay right now. This is not a fight I want to pick at this moment with this person. So I just be careful about that. Kathee, do you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think for a lot of our students, some of our students cannot communicate verbally, and therefore it would be very hard for us to think about how that would happen. But with somebody like Audrey and some of the students you all may be working with, how many of them want to look any different from the rest of the students in their class? They don't. And so the reality becomes, I can work on it with the students so that they know what their rights are, they know how to advocate, but it's up to them to make the decision to advocate. And then there are consequences to us advocating or not advocating. Some cases we advocate and somebody says, oh, what a troublemaker Kathee is. Okay? And so there's that consequence, as well as the issue of coming in and saying, you know, I need some help in this area, but I might not. And so I think that's a really good point, and I noticed Jennifer added to that too. So I think that we have to be very careful that we don't go pushing students. And I can give you an example, and in fact, if you go on our website, there's another student with Usher 1, Marissa, who is young, and she just goes in and straight away advocates like crazy for herself. And she's proud to be deafblind, and by gosh, you need to know what I need. And so everybody's different. And remember that Audrey was just trying to get used to the fact that she found out that she was losing her vision. And so, you know, we have a certain amount of denial that we live in, and slowly come to it however we come to it. So I think that's a great point. And I'm going to go on and ask the question 3. When you think of students of post-secondary transition age, what is the most, and I really believe this, what is the most critical for them to be successful as an adult? If all the components of the transition plan that you've learned about or that you knew about and Sue-Ann has just elaborated on are accurate and thoughtfully completed, considering that students' needs, strengths, preferences, interests, if you had to pick one word, what would it be for this group of students who have both the combined vision and hearing loss? And if you want to type in, that'd be great. One said independence. Any other thoughts? Social skills, interaction skills. Social and interaction skills requires what? Communication. Hint, CO, communication, social skills. Sequencing, communication. And I'm going to really encourage all of you to think independence is a great answer, or interdependence. In Miranda's case, it's interdependence. It's her needing people to do certain things physically, but she has the independence to tell them or to ask them. So keep in mind that the issue always becomes, if I can communicate, then I can be heard, no matter how I communicate. So, so that's question 3, and then we're going to quickly go to the last piece, and that's coordinating services with adult agencies after you've got those annual IEPs written. And so we have agency linkages, and that whole issue of transitions are designed to be result-oriented process that facilitates the movement from school to post-secondary living activities. These services include adult services when appropriate. Some adult services may be accessed while the student is still enrolled in high school, while others have to be done during high school and accessed after the child exits school. So, Sue-Ann, you want to talk about the interactive statewide resource?
Yeah, so I want to just say another thing about the state law with this. So the agency linkages need to happen. Every student, there's an agency out there for every student. So we need to be cognizant of that teachers have the responsibility to link students with appropriate adult agencies, whether that's DDD or DVR or other services that Kathee is going to show you in a minute. But they need to be listed. And if an agency provides a service, so if they provide some type of service that costs the agency money, such as a student is employed and DDD is coming in and offering service for that student or providing a support for that student or paying for something for that student, the parent and or student, if the student is able, needs to get permission for that agency to be at the IEP meeting, and that needs to happen before the agency becomes involved. So I just want to make that clear that there has to be written consent on file for that. Now, on the CCTS website, so again, this map is at www.seattleu.edu/CCTS, and I'll have Beth put the link in the chat box for you. But we have an agency linkage page, and it's very easy to find on our website. And you simply click on the county that you live in, and when you do that, a list of agencies that might be involved in your child's IEP or could be invited to provide services are listed. And so my program specialist, Beth Charles, does a great job of keeping this up to date. And this is an actual copy of our web page here and the actual map. Kathee, would you like to explain some other very specific resources that are available?
Sure. So you have a handout that has a lot of different resources. Many of them are specifically related to agencies that serve blind people or visually impaired people or deaf, hard of hearing people, and they may have a component connected with their agency that also serves deaf-blind students or students with combined vision and hearing loss. And some of the ones that you're going to find are going to relate to different websites that you can go to, both nationally and statewide, to get additional information as well as connection. So you're going to see, for example, the DBSC down in the lower left-hand corner actually is a service for people who have a combined vision and hearing loss or a deaf-blind. Where Perkins School for the Blind, you may want to go to that because there are many webcasts that talk about different issues, so it's a great training website. So that you have as a handout, and so please feel free to use it. That's as up-to-date as we have at the present time. We don't have that located on our website, but we certainly need to consider that. And just a reminder for people to be filling out the evaluation, the SurveyMonkey, if they would. And Are there any questions about the transition services flow chart that Sue Ann and I have been talking about and relating to students who have a combined vision and hearing loss? And also know that there are 4 examples that Sue Ann put up as part of your handouts about 4 different students. It's a great conclusion. And if you, did you want to talk about that a little bit, Sue Ann, those 4 student examples?
Yes, Kathee. I just wanted to mention that there are 4 student examples that were handouts today. And there's like a 1-page bio for each student. Each of these students have significant needs. And then it walks through every piece of the transition flow chart with examples and non-examples for each section. So it's kind of a nice resource if you want to study further what is an appropriate post-secondary goal and what's not, what's an appropriate course of study and what's not, what's an appropriate annual goal that aligns to the post-secondary goal and what's not. Same thing with agency connections. So all of those pieces are in there, all those components, and there are 4 students with varying disabilities.
And I'm just playing around, highlighting the Usher syndrome for those of you who are specifically interested in that area too. And with that, what I'd like to do is thank you all for participating again, as always. Hope it was helpful. Please give us positive, and positive, I mean constructive feedback so that we know ways to make this kind of training work better. And with that, we will say good evening and have a great evening. I hear over here in Spokane we may be getting some snow tonight. Just a reminder, there's some other trainings that you might be interested in as those come up. And this PowerPoint presentation will be sent out to all of you who participated tomorrow. Okay, with that, thanks again, Sue Ann, for all your great information and help, and we look forward to more webinars with all of you. Take care.